With the data I look at and the history that I know and the things that I've learned, I see communities constantly and consistently evolving and changing. And so I tend to think about small towns in a little bit more positive light, that it has changed a lot. It has evolved from where it has been 20, 30, 40, or 50 years ago. I know not everything's positive. I know there are problems and challenges, but I believe we need to nuance the narrative a little bit more away from just negative or revitalization, but more towards look at all these interesting things happening in all of these interesting places.
Nowhere could this be more applicable than Lanesboro, a small town with a plethora of experience with change, gleaned from the events that have taken place here in the last 40 years. This is that story.
When I think back to the 70s, I lived in Rochester and I'd come down here and visit my grandparents on weekends. Town was just dead. I mean, it was like nothing going on.
Lanesboro was a beautiful town, but it was pretty well closed up.
Lanesboro was like many small towns. It was somewhat abandoned, boarded up.
So what caused the transformation in Lanesboro from its semi-neglected state to the vibrant town it is today?
The trail was the first huge factor, I think, that really brought southeastern Minnesota, as well as Lanesboro, a lot of growth.
The railroad first entered the area in 1868 with the construction of a new portion of rail line that originally stretched from Rushford to Lanesboro. The railway was first christened the Root River Railroad, but changed names several times in rapid succession until 1880, when it was absorbed into the pre-existing Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad Company, often referred to as simply the Milwaukee Road. The railway greatly impacted the agricultural communities in the area by providing transport of goods and people. A railroad time card from May 16, 1880, describes up to 6 freight trains and 1 passenger train coming through Lanesboro daily. By the 1960s, however, the Southern Minnesota Division, as it was called, was reaching its lowest point after many years of decreased use, due in part to the national shift to truck transportation.
The train would come through once every 2 weeks or so, and they'd call you. And they'd say, the train's going to come through, make sure all your cows or horses aren't on the trail. It was really sporadic. So it wasn't like you could plan on Thursday afternoon. And it seems bizarre even to say, plan on the train coming through. I mean, who cares? Well, we did.
In 1978, the Milwaukee, Chicago, and St. Paul Railroad filed a request with the Interstate Commerce Commission to abandon the portion of railway running through southeastern Minnesota. The request was accepted in June of 1979.
I actually rode on the railroad the very last day. It was the final train ride that was given by the railway when they abandoned the railroad. And many people in these towns rode it because it was the last time. Actually, it was kind of fun because it was just an open air wood caboose, and we got to stick our heads out the window and have a nice time. It was a very uncertain time because people relied upon the railroad for commerce, and of course people were not as acclimated to truck traffic as they are today in 2016. So there was some reticence about the dependability of trucks and the accessibility of trucks. These are just conversations that I remember hearing, and that the railroad, as a style of transportation or a form of transportation would be gone.
With the abandonment began a 120-day public use negotiation period to allow organizations to assess the feasibility of purchasing the land for public use. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources had been interested in purchasing the land for the purpose of constructing a state trail since 1971, when state officials passed legislation that provided for the creation of the trail. So in mid-July 1979, the DNR promptly began their feasibility study, which they called the Milwaukee Road Corridor Study. This development generated a lot of buzz around town.
That was most of the discussion that you would hear in the bars, in the restaurants. Well, you know, there's a rumor that they're going to put a bike trail in on the old railroad. Oh, that's going to be great.
But not everyone agreed that it would be great.
The first time that I heard the proposal, or what they were going to do, was not exactly what all of us thought we should be able to expect, which was we should have an opportunity to get this land back. After all, our forefathers, somebody had this land subtracted from their total, etc. And we were legitimately concerned about the notion of having a thoroughfare go through the middle of your farm. It wasn't like the railroad who called you and said, we're coming through, get the cows off the trail.
This opinion was held by many. As part of the corridor study, the DNR conducted a massive survey of adjacent landowners, with hopes of contacting everyone along the study area. The findings contained some rather shocking statistics, including that 2 out of 3 landowners surveyed were opposed to public ownership of the corridor, and that 3 out of 4 landowners surveyed were opposed to development of the corridor as a state trail.
I think in general terms throughout the area, it was the influx of outsiders, the unknown aspect of that.
You still had that generation that didn't welcome change. They wanted to keep it the town that they grew up in. And you can't blame them for that. It was part of them.
They live in a small world. They wanted to keep things the same always and weren't open-minded enough to think it's a good thing for our city to have tourism.
But this is a very staid community. It's very staid. You know, and it's like trying to turn a battleship in the middle of the ocean without a motor.
The process of bringing the trail to Lanesboro proceeded despite the early concerns. The feasibility study was completed in January of 1980 with the decision to move ahead with the project. At that time, the first informational meetings were held for the community. In March of 1980, a formal hearing was conducted to help identify the hopes and, in large part, the concerns of the people. The meetings were mainly attended by 3 groups of people: the landowners, people who were strongly in favor of the trail, and by citizens seeking information about the project.
It was pretty much a blank sheet. Everybody had an idea, so it was somewhat disorganized early on. It began to take a little shape as time moved on. I think oftentimes we do this as human beings. We focus in on details without the big picture. And so the question became real quickly, is it going to be hard-packed gravel or is it going to become pavement? We didn't even know if we're doing it yet.
In an effort to ensure that it was not done, those opposed had organized to form the group Citizens' Right to Purchase Property Incorporated. An attorney was hired by the group, and great lengths were taken to present their case. But as the planning process went on, compromises began to be made.
I think what happened from a political maneuvering perspective was somewhat ingenious. What basically the DNR and others did was say, we'll take the flat land, Spring Valley and on, and we'll sell that back to the farmers. And then we'll take that land on the other side, bordering the river, and we'll sell that back to the farmers. And it left, the Hilda guys, they were the remainder. And so that began to turn it because it fractionally broke kind of the bond that we all had together.
By 1983, the planning process was winding down, as was the opposition, being replaced instead with an anxious anticipation of the trail that corresponded with the beginning construction.
It was an exciting time when they were putting the trails in. It was kind of sad to see the railroads go away, because I do remember as a young child, I could watch it go across the field, and so that was kind of fond childhood memory of mine. But at the same time, I believe I was 8th, 9th grader when they started taking the railroads out, and we would go walking out on the trails. So it was kind of adventurous, like, oh, this is where the train used to come, and it just seemed like it was an untouched part. Even though it had been traveled by the trains, it was untouched by feet in our eyes. And then as they added the paved bike trails, then we were able to go farther.
They operated the trail for a couple of years without any paving on it and just gravel. The trail was put in sections. Lanesboro was the start of the paved trail.
The Root River State Trail officially opened in 1989.
In fact, my son and my wife rode the inaugural ride with the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Minnesota from Rushford to Lanesboro on their bikes and cut the ribbon. And that changed the area.
My husband and I were married nearby in the town of Harmony in 1989, which actually was also coincidentally the ribbon cutting for the Root River Bike Trail. In the first years of our marriage, we would often come through Lanesboro for family Christmas or holiday gatherings, and we'd look and we'd see, wow, look at now there's a winery in Lanesboro. Well, now there's a theater. It looks like they're renovating the theater. You know, each time we came through, we just kept seeing a few more things that were being added here. From about that decade of 89 until, 2000 when we moved here, we could see a real progression. And then when we moved here, things were really, really hopping. I mean, it was very clear that much of what brought people to Lanesboro with the bike trail was now triggering this whole kind of economic development of arts and of lodging, the dining, the shopping. Things were happening downtown. Tourism was well underway.
The bike trail was the one biggest factor early on that opened up this area, because it opened up this area for other things to come in. That's where, soon after, the Commonwealth Theater came to town and did incredible things in Lanesboro. The arts came in and they were doing things. Mrs. B's was the first bed and breakfast that opened.
It's the synergy that these activities, the theater, the arts, the history, the recreational opportunities, all of these things are interrelated, and they're actually going on because of the other business being there, or the other activity being there.
One huge driver we have in our area is Lanesboro Arts.
We have a sales gallery, we have an exhibition gallery, and the organization is very, very busy with lots of other programs, which include education, artist residencies. We have a theater that we program with lots and lots of different performances going on. The list goes on and on and on. My experience is that the people that come in and out of the gallery are here for many different parts of the community. We have so many people walking in their funky bicycle gear. We have people coming in their swimming gear from the river.
And when people come for the arts, they discover nature and the bike trail. And when people come just for the bike trail, they just discover the arts and the theater. And so it really is different things to different people. And so there's really a whole menu. And I think it's that combination of arts and culture and the beauty of the environment and the outdoors that makes Lanesboro work really well.
It's just been a wonderful, perfect, combination of activities and events that everything supports each other.
I think it's a very interesting story to see that the trail that has been kind of not so well received has been very beneficial.
I'm not ashamed to admit I was wrong on resisting the trail. The trail was quite unexpected the way it turned out.
They didn't realize what the people that rode bicycles were like, that they didn't destroy their happy biking ground.
We get the best tourists in the world here. They don't throw a gum wrapper. They don't want to see a lot of Ferris wheels. They just want to walk around and look at trees, and it turned out to be something that was the opposite of what we thought it is. And the people that do come through your property, you want them to come through. They're nice people. We never know on a political issue what the outcome is. We only perceive it. And so that's never totally accurate, because perceptions aren't reality.
What is a reality is that Lanesboro has grown to become a leader in our area.
I refer to Lanesboro as the economic engine of our area. So there is this interest in replicating what has happened here. We have people from all over the United States that come here trying to learn how to do this. So there's this, we want to be like you, kind of thing. We want to experience a little renaissance in our town.
Yet in the area, surrounding communities resist becoming places that look and feel exactly like Lanesboro. While each wishes to become even more of a destination, they also want to maintain and honor their own identities in the process, a situation that requires a great deal of balance throughout the region.
Lanesboro is not a standalone community within southeastern Minnesota. I've always said that it takes all of us to make southeastern Minnesota better, and when our neighbors do better, we all do better.
I think the regional identity is something that still could be built for all of the small towns in our region. There's not one single community that, should ever feel that they're the only travel spot, because clearly we have all of that beauty and the resources and activities and assets all along that whole corridor that we need to share. Being that we are connected by the artery of the trail, there is that overall regional brand that should continue to be told. That story should be told. With that said, I also believe that each community really has their own individual identity that makes them unique. You just kind of think of all the other communities. When you think of Houston, I think of owls. I just do. I just think of their nature center, right? When you think of Rushford, I think of Lefse. Right. I mean, where can you find a Lefse factory like that, And when I think of Wayland, I think of pie. When I think of Lanesboro, I think of B&Bs. I still do. For me, that has always been kind of the brand piece that I think makes us unique, and that we have the most licensed bed and breakfasts of any town in the state of Minnesota. Oh, and rhubarb. If I said Lanesboro, it wasn't about rhubarb. Being the rhubarb capital. So I think that identity is important for each community.
It's a great idea. It's always, if you can find that thing about your town or your community that gets people down here. Lanesboro's done a great job of becoming a destination. I'd like to see all of the towns in southeastern Minnesota become like Lanesboro. I'd like to see it become something kind of like upstate that they do in New York, where there's all these different little towns. They all kind of had a claim to fame. There's a reason to go from town to town. But to do that, number one, we're all going to have to work together. Unfortunately, you can't just do it alone. Everyone does better when we all do better. And I do think we have enough people, particularly in the younger generations, that are willing to maybe start something going here, maybe a cooperative spirit. I think the cooperative spirit is pretty strong in the millennial generation. But yeah, the bike trail is a wonderful way to keep those towns together and to get them working together as well for the benefit of everybody. And I'd like to see Hoka joined with that and kind of join that network and become part of that.
So here we are today, a vibrant and unique community reaping the benefits of tourism. But what lies in the future for Lanesboro?
I hope it is still like it is today, in the respect that we are a community that is mystical. It's a community that wraps its arms around you. I hope we never lose that ability to do that.
Kind of the crystal ball and the thought of what it means for Lanesboro, I have always hoped for more development of the riverside area. So now as I walk along that area, I see our city sheds, and I think that whole river area could be so well developed. Again, just further kind of the next step for Lanesboro.
I would like to see probably something other than little boutiques and cafes. Like, we have the theater and we have the arts, but I don't know, I'd like something more than that.
I would like to see all the buildings downtown maintained, fixed up so that they're in good shape. There's a few that really aren't in good shape and could use some work, and I'd like to see all of that done. That would be where I'd like to start.
These are discussions that are currently being heard in Lanesboro. Much of this discussion stems from the Lanesboro Concept Plan. The process of creating the concept plan began in early 2016 and was completed in about 6 months. That said, the concept plan was designed to act as a guide for Lanesboro for decades to come by offering many suggestions for improvements deemed most important by the community and by a nationally recognized rural town planner, Randall Arndt. So as the future looms ahead with signs of impending change, Lanesboro stands ready to greet it. After all, we've done it before.
That's about it. And it's going to keep changing. And that's good.